My brother said, "Stop embarrassing us with your cheap car," until he saw the garage. My name is Daniel Carter, and I never thought I'd be the kind of person to share my private life online. My story isn't just mine, it's a warning. Last month, the person I trusted most, my own older brother, betrayed me in a way that made me question not only our relationship, but the values we were raised with. We grew up believing that family always had each other's backs, but somewhere along the way, he forgot that, and how it all unfolded. It wasn't just personal, it was public, humiliating, and unforgettable. But here's the thing about public humiliation. It cuts both ways. And my brother had no idea that I was about to flip the script in the most unexpected way. Before everything spiraled, life was simple. Weekends were my ski powers in the garage, fixing small engines that neighbors dropped off, repairing a friend's motorcycle, or just tinkering with my own projects. What began as necessity had become a quiet passion. Over the years, I'd built an impressive collection of rare and vintage vehicles, all hidden behind closed garage doors. A '69 Mustang Fastback, a fully restored '87 Buick Grand National, and a rare Ducati motorcycle. I never flaunted them. I hated the ego contests that came with expensive toys. Letting people underestimate me kept my circle genuine. Meanwhile, Eric's weekends revolved around golf course networking, rooftop bars, and curated Instagram posts of champagne brunches. We were living parallel lives, mine built on substance, his on presentation. I believed we still respected each other's choices, even if we didn't understand them. That illusion shattered in one instant the night Eric decided to turn my car into a punchline in front of an audience. Not realizing the quiet life or at least that's how I told myself to take it. "Man, you still driving that beater?" Eric would say with a laugh as we left Mom's house, patting the hood of my Camry like it was a stray dog. Or, ever think about upgrading? I knew Eric thrived on appearances. He'd always been the one chasing status, while I cared more about function than flash. But over time, the remarks sharpened. They weren't just casual jabs anymore, they came with a smirk, a glance at whoever was nearby, an unspoken "can you believe this guy?" Then came the exclusions. To go, where I'd scroll through social media and see group photos from events I was supposedly invited to, except I was missing. It began as harmless teasing, or at least that's how I told myself to take it. "Man, you're still driving that beater," Eric would say with a laugh as we left Mom's house, patting the hood of my Camry like it was a stray dog. Or, ever think about upgrading? It's 2025, not 2005. I brushed the comments aside because I knew Eric thrived on appearances. He'd always been the one chasing status, while I cared more about function than flash. But over time, the remarks sharpened. They weren't just casual jabs anymore. Came with a smirk, a glance at whoever was nearby, an unspoken "can you believe this guy?" Then came the exclusions. He'd forget to send me the address for a get-together until it was too late to go. Or I'd scroll through social media and see group photos from events I was supposedly invited to, except I was missing still. I tried to believe it was coincidence. That is, until our cousin's engagement dinner. The venue was an upscale downtown restaurant with valet service and floor-to-ceiling windows. As I pulled into the lot, Eric spotted me from across the way. He raised his hand like he was greeting me, but his voice carried across the crowd. "Dude, you really brought that. You're embarrassing the family." Heads turned. Laughter broke out, not the friendly kind, but the kind that stings. The valet grinned awkwardly, as if waiting to see if I'd take the joke well. I swallowed my pride, parked, and joined the dinner without saying a word. But inside, something shifted. The smirk on Eric's face, as he basked in the moment, lodged itself in my mind. I didn't know exactly how, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let that be the final word. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Eric called out of the blue to invite me to a charity gala his firm was hosting at one of the most exclusive hotels in the city. His tone was casual, but there was that familiar edge to it. "Dress sharp," he said. Then, with a pause that felt rehearsed, and maybe, take an Uber. His voice dripped with fake concern, as if my Camry were contagious, capable of infecting him with something unfashionable. I almost told him to shove the invite. But curiosity and, maybe stubbornness made me accept. I arrived early, hoping to avoid making an entrance. But, as I stepped into the lobby, I heard his voice from across the room. He was standing with a small circle of well-dressed guests near the bar, wine glass in hand. "Yeah, my brother's a good guy," he was saying, "but he's simple, doesn't really get the importance of presentation. Drives this ancient Camry, makes us look like we're from another era." Laughter followed. Not playful laughter, but the kind that turns you into an object instead of a person. I stood there for a moment, unseen, letting every word sink in. That's when I remembered something crucial. Eric had never once set foot inside my garage. He had no idea that my Camry was simply my workhorse, not my crown jewel. Know about the meticulously restored '69 Mustang Fastback, the glossy black '87 Buick Grand National, or the Ducati that looked like it had rolled straight off a showroom floor. In that instant, my humiliation morphed into something sharper as resolve. If Eric wanted my car to be his stage 4 mockery, I'd use that same stage to dismantle his image. Quietly, perfectly, permanently. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Our parents decided to host a big family reunion at my place, something they insisted on since I had the biggest backyard for the kids. Eric immediately volunteered to handle the parking arrangements, making sure no one's luxury car had to touch the curb. "We'll just tuck your Camry around back," he said with a smirk, like he was doing me a favor. I nodded, letting him believe I didn't care. The day of the reunion, Eric strutted around like an event planner, directing BMWs, Audis, and Teslas into neat rows in my driveway. At one point, he strolled over to my Camry, tapped the hood, and announced, "This little guy's shy, doesn't like the spotlight." Laughter bubbled from the nearby guests, none of them realizing the irony of his words. I stayed calm, enjoying the show. The more he preened, the sweeter my moment would be. After lunch, everyone gathered in the backyard for group photos. I waited until conversation lulled, then said casually, "Hey, you all want to see the project I've been working on?" Heads turned, curiosity sparking. Eric rolled his eyes, but a few people encouraged me. I walked to the garage, remote in hand. With a click, the door began to rise, slowly, deliberately. First, the Mustang's deep red grille appeared, then the Buick's gleaming chrome, and finally, the Ducati's sleek black frame. The cars sat under warm, angled lighting, each one spotless and commanding attention. The laughter from earlier evaporated, replaced by silence and wide eyes. Someone whispered, "Holy, is that yours?" And in that instant, Eric's smirk collapsed into something unguarded, pure, stunned disbelief. The silence after the reveal was deafening, the kind of pause that makes every movement feel amplified. Eyes widened, jaws slackened, and people drifted closer like they were being pulled by a magnet. The Mustang's candy apple red paint gleamed. Under the lights, the Buick's chrome shone like liquid silver, and the Ducati's polished frame looked ready to pounce. My cousin let out a low whistle. "Holy crap, Daniel, these are yours." I nodded casually, as if it were nothing more than a hobby. But my favorite reaction came from Eric. His trademark smirk dissolved into something unguarded confusion, embarrassment, maybe even a flicker of shame. "You never mentioned this," he muttered. "Didn't think it was worth mentioning," I said evenly. "I'm not really into showing off." A few people chuckled, catching the edge in my tone. Eric tried to recover, tossing out comments about how cool it was, but the shift in the air was undeniable. Suddenly, I was the one holding attention. Guests asked about restoration techniques, wanted to sit behind the Mustang's wheel, and snapped photos like they were at a car show. Eric, usually the loudest voice in any room, faded into the background. He hovered at the edges of conversations. No longer the focal point, his earlier swagger evaporated. And while I smiled and explained how I sourced parts or rebuilt engines, inside I felt something I hadn't in weeks control. The humiliation he'd dished out had just ricocheted back at him twice as hard in front of the exact crowd he'd been desperate to impress. The reveal wasn't some lucky coincidence, it was the result of careful, deliberate planning. After the charity gala, I decided there was no point confronting Eric with an argument. Words fade, but moments. They burn themselves into memory. I spent 2 full weekends in the garage, detailing each vehicle until they looked like something you'd find roped off in a museum. I buffed the Mustang's paint until it reflected like liquid glass, polished the Buick's chrome to a blinding shine, and ran my hands over every inch of the Ducati's sleek frame. I even swapped out a few trim pieces and adjusted the garage lighting so the glow would spill over the cars like a showroom display. The key was secrecy. I kept the garage locked at all times, made sure the blinds stayed closed, and parked the Camry in plain view so Eric's assumptions stayed intact. In his mind, nothing had changed. Was still the brother with the embarrassing car, but timing was everything. I needed the largest possible audience for the reveal, and when Mom announced the reunion at my house, I knew it was the perfect stage. That morning, I slipped the garage remote into my pocket, rehearsed a few offhand lines, and kept my expression neutral no matter how many digs Eric threw. Every smirk, every jab, only made me calmer. He thought he was in control, but I was already holding the final move, and when the time came, I wouldn't just be opening a garage door. I'd be triggering a trap he had built for himself, one he'd walk into without even realizing until it was far too late. As desert plates clinked and conversations hummed, I made my move. "Before we wrap up," I said, raising my voice just enough to carry, "I've been working on a little project I'd like to share." Heads turned. Eric leaned lazily on the patio railing, wearing the smirk of a man certain he was about to watch me show off a lawnmower engine. I strolled toward the driveway, remote in hand, and pressed the button. The garage door inched upward, slow and deliberate, first revealing the Mustang's flawless grille, then the Buick's elegant hood, and finally the Ducati's striking silhouette. Gasps rippled through the group. "These are yours?" someone asked. "Yep," I said evenly. "Restored them myself." Phones appeared instantly, flashes popped. Guests circled me, eager for details. I lifted hoods, told restoration stories, and let a few sit behind the wheel. Across the crowd, I caught Eric's expression, like someone had just unplugged his ego. His fiancée, previously glued to his side, drifted over to admire the Ducati, peppering me with questions. That one clearly stung. For the first time all day, Eric wasn't the center of gravity. And I didn't smirk, didn't gloat, I didn't have to. "The cars were saying everything I wanted," said Dot. Eric tried to play it cool. "Man, I had no idea you were into this stuff," he said, tossing out a laugh that sounded just a hair too sharp. The muscles in his jaw pulsed as if holding something back. His eyes kept darting around, scanning the faces of the guests maybe, hoping someone still saw him as the most interesting guy in the yard. They didn't. Every conversation around us was about my car's about. The Mustang's original V8, the months I'd spent tracking down that impossible-to-find Buick grill, or how I'd rebuilt the Ducati's engine from scratch. When someone tried to loop Eric into the talk by asking about his ride, he muttered something vague about leasing a new model every few years. The words landed flat. The difference between us was now crystal clear. I built something, he bought. Something. With each story I told, Eric seemed to shrink. The swagger in his posture was gone, his shoulders rounded. He stopped hovering near his fiancée, who was leaning in to see photos of my restoration process by the time the evening wound down and guests started hugging goodbye. He was hanging back near the fence, eyes low, like he'd rather disappear than risk another comparison. I didn't feel the rush of triumph I'd expected. There was no giddy spike of revenge, just a calm sense of completion. The balance had shifted. I hadn't raised my voice, thrown an insult, or asked for an apology. I'd simply let the truth stand in the open, gleaming under the soft garage lights. He understood it, and I understood that he'd never take that same tone with me again. In the weeks after the reunion, things between Eric and me cooled sharply. He stopped cracking jokes about my car, my house, or anything else tied to my life. Our conversations became short, polite, almost mechanical. Word from mutual relatives was that he'd been quieter at other gatherings, like he was testing a new version of himself. Several people reached out to say they respected me more after that night, not because of the Mustang, Buick, or Ducati, but because I'd never dangled them as trophies. They saw it as restraint, proof I didn't need to compete for attention. A few even asked if I'd restore cars for them, and before long, I was elbow deep in 2 new projects. The Camry. I still drive it daily. It's still reliable, still mine. But now it carries something extra, private reminder that what people see isn't always the truth. Flash doesn't equal worth. And the loudest voice in the room rarely has the deepest story. Eric hasn't apologized, and I doubt he will. He doesn't need to. That night, the balance shifted. He saw it, I saw it, and from then on, the conversation between us was already over. Looking back, I understand this was never truly about cars. It was about respect, how it's earned, how it's kept, and how quickly it can vanish when pride takes control. Eric saw one detail of my life, the old Camry, and built his entire opinion around it. He assumed it defined me, that it set the ceiling for what I could be. He never asked questions, never wondered if there was more beneath the surface. That's the trap of valuing image over substance. You start to believe the facade tells the whole story. When reality finally breaks through, it feels like a punch you never saw coming. My revenge worked not because it crushed him, but because it corrected a false narrative without me having to say a single cruel word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply let the truth stand there, gleaming under the garage lights, and the truth has a strange power. It lingers. Once people see it, they can't unsee it. Eric will carry that night with him, not as humiliation, but as a quiet recalibration of how he judges others. The moral: never underestimate someone who doesn't flaunt their wins. Quiet confidence, when revealed, can echo louder than any brag.